Hi, and welcome to part two of our interview with Johnny Echols. Want to back announce that great song, little snippet you heard from Bummer in the Summer. That's off their incredible third album, Forever Changes, which we're going to be talking about. You're listening to Gonzarilla, the podcast about music, movies, comedy, and all forms of obsessive consumption. My name is Brian Bentley. If you guys were with us in part one, you heard Johnny talk about touring with Little Richard, hanging with the Beatles, playing with Jimi Hendrix and Billy Preston, and how love ruled the Hollywood Sunset Strip club scene in the mid 1960s. Johnny was also filling in details of how they recorded their proto-punk nugget 7 and 7 Is, a song that absolutely inspired bands like the Stooges and MC5 years ahead of its time. So we left off just before the recording process involved in some of the sessions for Love's third album, Forever Changes, a record that forever changed the music landscape for many of us. So let's pick it up in part two with our interview with Johnny Echols. Let's move on to the record that changed, obviously changed your lives, changed the lives of so many people. And I've talked to young guys who talk about just what a mind blower that Forever Changes is. This was your third record. I would rank it up with Pet Sounds and Revolver and Aftermath and all those records that were so transcendent to everything that was going on that there was really nothing to compare them to. That was originally supposed to be a double album.
Correct, yes. We were starting to get, a little miffed because Arthur's getting credit for stuff, and Brian and I are actually writing the music, and Kenny also, to a degree. But we're feeling that we're being left out. We're not getting credit that we deserve. So we had decided that Forever Changes, that the project that turned into Forever Changes, was going to be a double album. And so Brian and I worked on songs. So I would do one side, Brian would do the other side, and then the other two sides would go to Arthur. So we had worked on them for months and months. And when we get to the studio, we hear that it's just dropped on us that the record company can't afford a double album right now because it's really expensive when you add strings and horns in the double album. So that they would do the second part later, and it would be another album entirely rather than a double album. Well, of course, both of us were devastated by that, Brian and myself. But Brian took it harder than anybody, and he basically staged a minor mutiny. He wouldn't play Arthur's stuff the way he would have played normally. There wouldn't be the same panache and feel that he would put to it. And when we started playing, it just wasn't working. And, he's sulking and stuff. So Bruce Botnick, who was kind of an ombudsman, they said it was the producer, but actually Arthur produced it, and Bruce was just kind of keeping the peace. And so they brought people from the Wrecking Crew down, and they were going to play with us, to kind of get the foundation together. And then we would add our little flourishes, and I do the leads and all of that, and maybe we could get this thing done. Well, they brought the Wrecking Crew down, and I had known Don Randy and Hal Blaine, from playing studio work before. So we started. Now, these guys are fantastic musicians, but they didn't sound like us at all, And so when we did the first couple of songs and realized that this just can't work because these guys are polished and, but they don't sound like us.
Yeah.
And so we got to the point where we're just going to call it quits. And we just sat down and talked to each other and decided, is this the way, you want to go out, just kind of a fizzle? And we just kind of, talked it out. Elektra offered us a bit more money. And so we went back into the studio and finished the album because, we had worked on these songs for a while. So it wasn't like we didn't know the songs or there was something keeping us from playing them. It was just, egos and hard feelings that was keeping us from finishing it. So once we'd straightened out all of those problems and decided that we were going to do it, we finished it within, I think, less than a week.
Yeah, it was listed as a 64 hours total, which is not much. I mean,
Yeah,
that's moving
yeah,
pretty fast.
yeah. It, as I said, it was we were ready to go. It was just once we got over the the hard feelings.
I think, Alone Again or, which is a song that a lot of people recognize and they don't know who the band is, but they know, oh yeah, that's a great song. I think what makes that song is the flamenco guitar on that. Can you talk about how you decided to go in that direction?
Well, that is serendipitous because initially, Alone Again was supposed to have a banjo intro. Now, we were, young and arrogant, and we thought, banjo, it's strings, we tune in, that we could play it. So neither of us, Brian or I, had any experience playing banjos. So we rented them and they brought them and put them down. Really nice banjos, but we couldn't play the damn things. I mean, it just sounded horrible. And it sounded so bad. And we spent hours trying to figure out something to do with these things that Alone Again was just about to be shelved and we were just going to do another song. And we went to lunch and we came back and I'm in the corner noodling. I play Spanish, riffs and things.
Uh,
Lorendo Almeida, as I mentioned before, was a teacher. So that's one of the good things to do to warm up is to play Spanish riffs. And so that's what I'm doing, just doing finger picking and playing Spanish and flamenco runs. And David Angel, who was the arranger, he heard that and it was his idea. And so why don't you open the song with one of those runs and do that? And so I started, fiddling with it and coming up with little, touches here and there. And Brian said, "Yeah, okay, man, let's do it," because he was becoming, upset that his song was going to be shelved. So if there was a way to save it, then he was all for it. And so we did this a couple of times, and I played the Spanish riffs in the beginning and opened the song with that. And it started to really become something. It was a so-so song before, but then David said, "Let's put a trumpet part, and he's going to double your guitar line." So there's a little thing where we're playing in G flat, and I slipped down to B flat to do this little run, and the trumpet mirrors that. He's playing da ba dee da 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 dee da da. So he plays what I had already played, and it really. Then Bruce, did some little twiddling of the knobs and brought my guitar up a little in certain places and lowered it, and it ended up being really a great song where it started out being, as I said, a so-so kind of bluegrassy song, but that was all just serendipity and having a magnificent arranger, David Angel, and he's the one that actually, kind of put that together from the ideas that we were working on. He just brought them all together and turned them into a song.
the flamenco guitar and the horns and everything and the strings, it gives the song a grandeur and a scope that is cinematic.
Yes, it is. It's amazing. And Brian was one happy camper. I tell you, because that song has earned a boatload of money. It's been covered, dozens of times.
I got to tell you, my favorite song on the record, specifically for the last 30, 45 seconds of it, is A House is Not a Motel. I have never taken acid, but I once cranked that song up with the headphones and listened to your guitar at the end of it, and I felt like I had. It's an amazing, amazing song.
Well, I keep using the term serendipity, but this again was weird because when we did the first solo, we know we had finished the song, and then now we're at an 8-track studio, so I can overdub now. And I did the first solo, but there was some problems with the headphone system, and I couldn't hear what I had played. Now I need to be in the studio. I can't be in the booth playing. I need to be in there with my amp, and just crank it up and play. And it was either go in the booth and listen to it, which would have taken away the spontaneity and the feeling, or not play two guitar solos. And so Arthur worked it out to he's in the booth and I can see him. So when the first guitar goes up and higher on the neck. Arthur is raising his arms up high, and when I'm playing lower, he puts them down low. And so I played the second solo, remembering what I thought I had played on the first one. And it's so strange that they actually blend together, and it sounds like it was written that way, but that was just total, just an accident, really.
And that's all you at the end of the song, right?
Yes, that's all me playing.
Wow.
Everything.
You mentioned a situation with Neil Young. Neil coming down to record some tracks. I mean, he had that song "Expecting to Fly," which was a big. Everybody was talking about that record because it was so well produced. Can you tell us briefly, like how that worked out or didn't work out?
Well, you see, we knew Neil. We used to hang with Neil, smoke grass, and hang out and trip with Neil, and we just could not accept him as a producer. It just wouldn't work. Now, we didn't know he was even to be involved until we get to the studio, and Bruce Botnick had asked Neil to come down because at that point Neil was going through hard times, and he was about to be evicted.
Really?
And he had no money.
Wow.
So he was going to get a producer's cut for producing this one song. It would have been, I believe, Daily Planet. And when he got there, as I said, Arthur and me both started laughing, and you know, the laughter turned into, wait a minute, man, you can't be serious, because Bruce is serious, Neil is serious, but we're not. And so after a little talk, and we just say, man, this can't work, and don't do this. Why don't you just pay him, whatever for the day, and let's just call it a day. And that's what they did. So he had no involvement whatsoever in any part of that. It was just that dumb idea by Bruce Botnick to help Neil out, which wouldn't have worked.
Yeah, maybe a little overthink on that one, but
yeah.
I want to talk about the castle a little bit. Okay. This is a phenomenal story about this place. It was formerly owned by Bela Lugosi.
No, that's not Bela Lugosi. This was an old silent film star. Bela Lugosi was where we did the first album cover.
Okay, yeah.
Okay, yeah, but the castle was, I'm not sure now, it's either Lillian Gish or one of the other silent film stars, and she had moved to Paris. And she had this humongous estate in the Las Feliz, near Griffith Park, Las Feliz area. And we call it the castle, but it was like just a really huge estate, and they owned all of the grounds and stuff. And it was just really lovely, but it had gotten into disrepair, and people started just camping out there and squatting there because no one lived there for years. And the city was getting upset because people were hanging out there and stuff, and the neighbors didn't like it. So Jack Simmons was a friend of Brian McLean's father, who was an architect, and they asked us if we would like to live there. And we said, we can't afford to live there. And he said, listen, all you have to do is take care of the place, pay the taxes, and that's all you have to do. Well, back then, because the place was, kind of in disrepair, it ended up costing us $150 each to live in this humongous mansion that the fireplace was large enough that you could walk in it. I think there are pictures of Kenny Forsey standing in the fireplace. These beautiful marble floors and this blown glass solarium. And this place was just, if you saw it, you would have thought a king or a prince lived there. But, as I said, all of this beautiful rosewood paneling and stuff. But it had started to become a little derelict. It was losing its charm. And so we got to live there, and it became the party spot. So whenever musicians like Hendrix or Jefferson Airplane, when they would come to town, they would stay in one of the suites there because they had divided it into suites. And so it was just, and so it became the spot basically for quite a while.
LA had become such a melting pot and such a attraction for people trying to make it in show business, people trying to make it in music, that you had all sorts of types of people mingling. And one of the guys that you ran across was a guy by the name of Bobby Bousselet.
Correct.
This is actually quite an interesting part of your legacy and story, because not many people can talk about a member of the Manson family and discuss his guitar skills, in the same sentence. And I was curious, how good a guitar player was he? And how did you meet him? And how did you finally decide, hey, this guy isn't going to do me that much good?
We were playing at a place called the Brave New World. I mentioned that earlier.
Yeah.
And we would play a song called Revelation, or we at the time was called John Lee Hooker, but we couldn't use his name, so we changed it to Revelation. And we would play this song every night, and we would invite people, to come up and jam, because it was just a straight rocking beat, and you could come up and learn it, and in a couple of minutes you were, in the groove. And so people would come up and plug in and play. And one night, Bobby Bousselet came. We called him, I think he called himself Cupid. And he came in and he plugged in and we were playing. And he seemed to fit in. And he got a good, nice groove going. And so I didn't think any more of it. But then the next night he showed up and asked if he could play. And we said, sure. So this became a habit. He would just come down every night and plug in and play. And pretty soon he started playing other songs too. And so he became part of the group. Now he wasn't paid and he wasn't an official member of the group, but he was part of the group. He came in and, he went back with us to the dressing room and he hung out with us. But he was just not an official paid member of our group. And it sounded good and he played for quite a while, for several months. And then we met Brian, and we invited Brian to come down. We had met him at a place called Ben Frank's in Hollywood, and that was where all the musicians would go after the gig, would go hang out there. And so we met him there, and he told us that he was the roadie for the Byrds, and he introduced us to David Crosby. And then lo and behold, the next night, Brian shows up and he brings David with him and several of the people that the Byrds followers. They called them the Sherwood Forest crowd. I mean, these were dancers basically.
Yeah.
And they would come and dance, and pretty soon, Brian played and loved his playing. He fit in with our group, and all of these people, of course, they came with him, and so we ended up telling Bobby that he was no longer needed, and because Brian fit in so much better, and he would be someone that added to our group besides all the people that came with him. He just added a certain something to the group that kind of completed us. And then Arthur and I knew that this was the group. When
Yeah.
we played a couple of songs and thought, wow, this is the group that can actually do something. So
Did you ever get any way, even peripherally, mixed up with any of the Manson stuff? I believe I saw an interview with you where you said that Bobby Bousselet said, hey, we're going up to a guy named Gary Hinman's house. Do you want to come along?
oh, no. Bobby came to my house. I say we'd been on tour, and back then everything was so open and free that you didn't lock your doors. So I
Right.
came home from the tour. We'd had been in San Francisco, and Bobby was in my house. He was just sitting on the floor playing one of my guitars, and it was perfectly fine. I hadn't seen him for a while, but so I'm happy to see him, and I didn't know, but there were, I could see my bedroom doors closed, and I says, "Is there someone in there?" And he said, "Yeah, Sadie came with us, and just she was tired and wanted to crash." So I sure that's fine. And a while later, this thing came out, this really skinny, cadaverous girl that really was in need of a bath, had been sleeping in my bed, and I was, upset by that. And we chatted for a while, and Bobby said, "Well, I better go. Charlie will get mad." And I said, "Charlie? Who's Charlie?" He said, "Well, this guy we live with up in, Spawn Ranch," I think he said. I'm not sure if it was Spawn Ranch or the other one. But anyway, I said, "Man, he's going to get mad. You mean dude is like your father? You know, because that was just weird to me. He's upset that somebody else, um, doesn't want him to be where he is. And it turns out that, of course, Manson is a very racist guy. And he was afraid that Sadie, who turned out to be Susan Atkins, one of those murderers, to tell him that. So that was as close as I came to any of that, is having both of them in my house at the same time.
You said you were friends with Dennis Wilson?
Yes, yeah. Yeah, I'm just, knew Dennis through the scene. So yeah, I would go to his house and quite a bit. And
were you there when Charlie moved in and sort of like took over the place? Did you
yeah,
see
I
any
went
of that?
there and I saw all of that. And that was the first time I actually met Charlie. And I see this little sawed off runt of a guy who I listened to one of his songs because they insisted I listen to his stuff. And I just thought it was just pablum, pedestrian word salad. It made no sense. It was just nonsense. And so I'm trying to be cool. You don't want to hurt someone's feelings, but I didn't give him any indication that I thought what he played was good or even acceptable. So I said, yeah, cool. Just kind of wanting, not to be involved with him, because you could just see he was just not the kind of person you wanted to be around.
Did creepiness just kind of come right off the guy? I mean, did he just?
Yes,
Yeah,
and everybody was afraid of him, and I'm wondering, why are they afraid of this little tiny little guy who needs a bath? All of them needed baths. It was so weird. It was like they never took baths.
The 60s had a lot of great concepts I could get behind, but I can't process this whole thing about not bathing. Arthur wrote a great lyric for A House Is Not a Motel. The waters turn to blood, and if you don't think so, go turn on your tub. I know that was probably written for the Vietnam War, but it could have been written about the summer of '69 in LA.
Yes, it could have been. Yeah, but that line, there's an interesting story about that. We were playing in San Francisco, and there was an AWOL soldier from Vietnam. We were sitting at a table, and he just walked up and sat down, and without being invited. And he started talking, and he's telling us about Vietnam. And, we're thinking this guy's a little weird, so we want to leave. And we're going to say, man, we got to go. And he puts a gun on the table. I think it was a 45 or something. It was a big, huge gun. And so then we realized this is serious. So we sat back down, and he said, I want to finish my story. I'm not going to hurt anybody. And so he starts to telling us that when blood mixes with mud in these war areas, it turns gray, and that there would be times when one of the service people, the soldiers, would be wounded, and he would be in the field all night long crying out for his mother or crying out for God. So you hear in one of the songs Arthur is saying, one parts of the song is saying, and you can call my name, and he's talking about the story that this guy is telling us. And after he finishes telling us all about the horrors of war and all of that, and that he's actually AWOL, he just gets up and takes his gun and splits. And Arthur turns that into a song.
I always wonder about the 60s, like, is the gun on the table really necessary?
Well, no, I think he wanted us to stay and hear him out.
Yeah, well, yeah.
And so, of course, when he put it on the table, we heard him out.
Johnny Echols and his incredible guitar work at the end of A House Is Not a Motel. Why don't we take a listen to it?
More confusions, blood transfusions. The news today will be the movies for tomorrow. And the waters turn to blood. And if you don't think so, go turn on your tub. And if it's mixed with mud, you see it turn to gray. Then you can call my name. I hear you calling my name.
everybody that's ever been in a band remembers the first day they got together with the guys to play, and they remember the last day when they realized that it was ending. And for your band, I thought that it ended ridiculously prematurely. Do you remember what the feeling was in your gut? I mean, you're young at this point. I mean, you're like what, 21 years old,
Yeah.
and you're being told this incredible thing that, you know, we've been on Billboard and we've been on American Bandstand and we've done all this stuff and it's over with. I mean, how did that hit you and what were you thinking?
Well, see, it wasn't so sudden for me because the Forever Changes fiasco, when we were expecting one thing and we got another, that still was there. There was an undercurrent, and so I like, as I had mentioned before, I like blues and jazz, and Henry Vestine of Canned Heat was a really dear friend, and we had talked about putting together a blues band, a righteous blues band. So I'm looking, more and more toward doing that. And then Brian calls me, and unknown to me, I hadn't known this at all, that during all of this turmoil of doing Forever Changes when Brian wasn't playing right and all of that, that he had been talking to Elektra without any of us knowing it with Jack Holzman, and they had worked out a deal where he would do a solo album. Of course, he would stay with Love, but they were going to do a solo for him, and that was why he decided to play Arthur's songs properly. And so when he calls me up and tells me that, at first I'm just really, really angry, and then I said, let's go and talk to Arthur and tell him the good news. And Arthur did what I knew he was going to do, but I just didn't have the heart to do it myself. So when we see Arthur, Brian tells him, yeah, I worked out a deal with Elektra. I'm going to do a solo album. And Arthur said, Brian, that's fantastic. And gave him a hug. Man, that's cool. You're fired.
Sorry to laugh, but I was waiting for that. That's great. You're fired.
That. And we tried a couple of times to put it back together, but once it's broken, the magic is gone. It's just gone. And we played a couple of gigs at the Santa Monica Civic, and I think the Ciro's. No, it wasn't Ciro's. It was called This Boss by then. Anyway, and Brian wasn't there, and we played, and it just didn't sound the same without his input. It didn't feel the same on stage, and we just walked away. And Arthur continued playing, but it never was the same. He released a few records, but I don't think they even earned back the studio costs.
I think you said at one point that Brian was essentially irreplaceable, just not only for the spirit, but like the texture that he brought to the band, the way it was like a Brian Jones thing. You got this dimension from him that was unique.
Yes. He was, was much more integral to the group than I even realized. It was just standing on stage when he wasn't there. It wasn't the same group anymore. It was somebody else. So it was easy for me just to walk away because it just wasn't there.
I wanted to ask you about Henry Vestine because I'm a huge Canned Heat fan. Did you know Alan Wilson at all?
No, I didn't know. Henry and the Mole, I knew.
Yeah,
and,
Larry.
Larry and the other guys, I would know peripherally. Hey, how are you doing? What's happening? If we'd sit and smoke a joint or get high or whatever. But we were not friends the way Henry was and Larry.
I came across a story, and I don't know if you want to comment on it. Pretty wild story. I was doing some research. It was written in the Dallas Observer in 1999. Are you familiar with that story?
No, I don't know which one.
It talks about the post-Love situation and what happened when the band broke up and everything. And one of the things I found just outrageous was that Arthur was jailed in a California state prison for allegedly firing a gun in the air that apparently another guy came later on and said, no, Arthur didn't do it. I did it. And yet they just stuck it to him. And then Brian and Ken died. And it actually said about Johnny, it said, Johnny's whereabouts remain a mystery, but people seem to imagine him walking off into the desert and never coming back. One thing is certain, he sure doesn't want to talk about his old band and the associations with Love. Was that a reporter that ever talked to you personally,
No,
or?
they never asked me anything. If they asked me, I would have told them all about it. And the truth about the Arthur situation is Arthur at one point became enamored with guns. It just, for some reason, I have no idea why, but almost like Phil Spector did. He
Yeah.
had a gun on him all the time. Anyway, Arthur's like that. He had a gun in a holster. Anyway, he had a party at his house. He was living in an apartment, actually. And they're making noise and dancing and stuff. And one of the neighbors was upset and said they're making too much noise. Now, Arthur has the gun and he goes to the door the first time with the gun. He tells the guy to go to hell, so to speak. I won't use his language. And then they go back and, the party goes on. And the guy comes back again and he's angry this time. And then Arthur has the gun out of the holster. He didn't point it at him, he didn't fire. He's just holding the gun now. And the guy calls the police. And a couple days later, they decided, they came there and the police told them, they had to break it up. So that the party breaks up. And a couple days later, the police come there and arrest him because Arthur had been arrested before on a couple of other things. And
so they already had a couple strikes on him already, I guess.
So they charged him. And so that was a 12-year because it was a 3 strikes thing. And so they gave him 12 years in prison. And I think he did 6 or 7 of them before the appellate courts reversed it and said he had ineffective assistance of counsel because the other 2 charges actually were misdemeanor charges and they never should have been part of the 3 strikes. So he served, as I said, 6 or 7 years, I'm not certain. And he was released by the appellate court, and that was that.
Bruce Botnick was also quoted in this article saying that Arthur came up to him and he didn't even recognize him outside the Whiskey A Go-Go in the 80s. And Arthur said, "Hey man, you got any money?" And he said, "I didn't even recognize him. He didn't recognize me." And it made me feel terrible. So I assume Arthur had a really rough period.
Yeah. The sad part of this is Arthur was getting all of these accolades and he'd been called a genius and all of these things that people are throwing at him, all these superlatives. And Arthur knows that he's not a musician, that he never played. I think on all of our records, he played guitar on one, and that was on, I think, My Flash on You, which has like 2, 3 chords. He couldn't play, guitar very well at all. Arthur had a musician's soul, but he didn't want to take the time required to become a musician. And so, but he's hearing all of this and he goes into the studio and now he's telling other musicians what to play. Like when we recorded, he didn't tell us what to play. He just said, "Oh, I like this," or "I don't like that." And, we'd work it out until we came to an understanding and the song would kind of write itself. We play and, I mentioned that to you before, where now Arthur is basically, he's running the whole show. He's telling these guys what to play, and they play what he tells them to play. Well, as I said, not being a musician, it's hard to tell another musician what to play and have it turn out right unless you are a musician yourself. And he can't write it down, so all he can do is tell it.
Ready? We're going to roll take 24 just for you. Okay, let's take it from the top again, Echols. Hold it. Okay, ready? Roll him and take 26. Hold it. Let's get a better start. Take 27. Hold it, Echols. Come on. You're playing too hard on the strings. Take 31. You guys should relax a little bit, man. Take 35. Hold it. What happened to the sound of your guitar? You got it up as loud as you had it? All right, you ready? Take 36. Oh, Brian, you speed up, man. Brian speeds up. You stay in one range of the guitar throughout the whole thing, man. Because, you know, you're the one that says you can blow in the studio, man. Nobody to bug you. You gotta blow, man. Are you ready to take it from the top?
So the gigs start being fewer and fewer and fewer, and it just goes downhill after that. He's trying to live up to an image that he does not have. The finest wordsmith poet that I've ever known or heard. You know, I put him in the category with Dylan, but Arthur was not a musician.
And I suppose you had conversations with him from time to time where you might say, hey, man, why are you doing this to yourself? Can't we focus? You know, why are we spinning our wheels? Were you able to reach him?
Of course. And we came together and talked and tried putting it back together, but either Brian was still, this is before, you know, of course, before he died, or Kenny, no one actually came together at the same time until they released a box set. And the box set was Love Story.
Was that Rhino? Rhino did that?
Yeah. And we finally decided that we were going to all get together and play. And we worked out our differences and all the hard feelings and all of that. And we, were going to the rehearsal studio to play. And this is when we found out Arthur has his case, because we didn't know that Arthur was going to court or there was a chance that he would go to prison.
So what year was this about? Are we talking about early 90s?
Yeah, this would have been around 95, 96.
95, 96, okay.
Yeah, and they released the box set, and we were going to go on a world tour to support it, and we would have gotten a really nice paycheck. So everybody was, of course, on board for that. But that's when, we're waiting at the studio for Arthur, and he doesn't show. And so now we're pissed off at him, thinking, man, it's the same old Arthur. He doesn't show up, and, but we find out later that he had been found guilty, and they took him immediately right into custody right there. And that was that.
Wow. The timing of that sucks so bad, because you guys were up for nomination for the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, I would imagine around 91 or 92.
Yeah, everything was falling into place. We were ready to go. And then that happened, and that just killed everything. And then we talked about, getting together, Brian and I, and then Brian is giving an interview with Kevin Delaney, and is right across from Cantor's, and he just has a heart attack right there and dies on the spot. He didn't, it wasn't like he was sick. He knew that he had about nothing. He just was sitting talking and then just died.
And he was roughly around 50 at the time? Like that? Yeah. I mean, and this is a thing that the 60s seems dogged by so many premature deaths of so many musicians. Brian turned to Christian music, and he was doing his own thing. Did he have the kind of demons that would drive you to not keep yourself healthy, or drug issues? I still can't figure out what happened to him.
Well, of course, all of us had drug issues, myself included. So, I had gotten to the point where I put it behind me and moved on. But both of them still were part of that scene. But I think once Brian became involved in Christian rock and all of that, that was, the door for him to walk through and get himself away from that. So he was able to exercise those demons and become a different person. I never knew whether it was the right thing for him to do, because the type of people that he was involved with were, a little far out as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah, I mean, I'm wondering if it was a reaction or a kind of a coping mechanism? Because some people do get into religion to try to find some kind of purpose, but they end up getting really sidetracked. So
Yeah, I think that probably was it to a degree because um, no, you don't want to kind of denigrate someone else's faith. That's
yeah, no.
between him and whoever it is that he looks to as his God. But it just seemed to me that it was more than a simple faith thing. I think it was, you know, trying to find a purpose, a reason, so he could understand who he was. Because all of us, and that happens not just to us, but so many musicians, you finally get your dream. Everything that you wanted is finally here. You got the money and the accolades and all of the people, adoring crowds rather. And you do everything you can to destroy that or become involved with drugs. It's like you do everything you can to destroy what you've spent your life to build. And so many of us do that, and it's hard to understand why. I think a person could um, if they could figure that out, they could become a trillionaire. A psychologist or psychiatrist could write a book figuring out because it's not, it's just damn near everybody that I know. There's so few musicians that don't succumb to demons, one way or the other.
Sometimes when you achieve fame overnight or really fast, there's a part of you that feels like you don't deserve it. And there's a part of you that feels maybe someone's going to find out you're really not as great as everybody thinks you are. And there's a sense of living up to what everyone, if you're like Jim Morrison, they're expecting a freak show. So it's like, how can we push his buttons so he flips out on stage? And I think for even the most well-adjusted person, it's really tough to be vaulted up to this pinnacle of fame and everything. And then in your guys' case with Love, just having it end overnight, you say to yourself, I'm 21 years old. Now what do I do? You moved to New York and you were doing some session work. I just wanted to ask you real quick about the Miles Davis thing and the whole percussion thing, because I thought that was a really interesting project.
Yeah, that was fascinating because, he would sometimes, go to the park, Washington Square, whatever, and there's the drum circles, and people are, whatever percussion thing they can find, or trash can lid or whatever, and they all started beating, and there's dancing, and they're doing these rhythmic, and they become more and more complex as these people are playing together. And he thought that this would be fascinating if I could do that and play. But the thing was, they could not leave or did not understand that you have to leave a space for the soloist, and Miles was the soloist, so you can't just play all over him. You have to leave room for him to play. And they didn't understand that. And the fact was, if they were taught how to play and what to do, then it's no longer spontaneous, and it defeats the purpose. So there were a couple of recordings that they did, and they really, I don't think they should be released. In other words, that would be great thinking, there's money, but as far as pushing the boundaries or doing something that's worthwhile, it really isn't. It's just, basically people beating on drums and trash can lids and a trumpet trying to find its place in it, and it never comes together. It never melds into something that you would call music.
It sounds a little bit like Lou Reed's Metal Machine music.
Sometimes there's too much, and that's what was there. There's just too much, and as I say, if you try to explain to them, then the spontaneity goes away, and then you just,
When you found out that the Damned had done a cover version of Alone Again, and you basically turned on an entire new generation of fans, can you talk about
yeah,
that?
that was cool. That was amazing that they had a pretty substantial hit with it, and that was what was so cool is when Arthur got back out, and then it was a year or so later before we got together and started playing, and we still to this day we have a humongous audience of younger people And we played in Liverpool, Sefton Park, a couple of years ago, and we had over 80,000 people come out to see
Jeez.
us. And we're drawing everywhere we play now. We sell out, and we're playing, especially in Europe and England, to very, very large crowds. And they're all, of course, they're not in our age bracket because most of us are, moving on.
Right,
But
right.
there's still quite a few of us that, people from my generation that are playing.
I guess the Love Farewell Revisited tour in the UK, did that actually go all the way through? Was that canceled early due to COVID, or was that in 2019?
Oh, no, we played that in 2019, and it was great. And so we're planning to do a redux, actually, the Love final tour again, because we had such a really huge audience, and the response was so great that we were invited to come back. So we were set to play next summer. And of course, that had to be canceled because of COVID. So we still are in talks of maybe doing it in 2022. So what that was we were giving a farewell to the people that had come out and supported us all those years. And so it was, just a kind of a thank you that was more than just a thank you. It was just like a celebration of a time, a celebration of a life, of our lives, of music, and so many things that it just didn't, it couldn't end like that. It had to go on. So we will continue to play until there's no longer anyone there to hear us. So.
Yeah, and you're still featured on YouTube all over the place, jamming with bands like the Standells. So if anybody wants to go see Johnny Echols on a stage, you can still see him on YouTube until this whole thing gets worked out. How have you been dealing with the loss of the live music scene? Is it something that you've been able to look at philosophically?
No, I haven't been
No, okay.
philosophical at all. I've been,
Are you pissed? I mean, how do you feel about it?
Oh, I'm fine. We're healthy. I've had a vaccine, and
Uh-huh.
so we're doing fine, Georgie and me. We're happy, and um, we're bummed out because this time we can never get back, and time is moving on, and at some point, I won't be able to do that. Stand up on stage for 2-3 hours and play, but right now I can, and I feel robbed of this time, of this moment, because we built to this thing, and we've got so many people involved, and we have such great audiences. And then instead of following through and continuing, we have this something just comes out of the blue and snatches that away from us, and we're all in limbo.
I mean, Baby Lemonade, great band for you to collaborate with, by the way. They talk a lot about younger people and how it's affecting younger people, but I always say, well, how about the older folks who have a very finite amount of time and energy and the ability to be mobile and just like function. I mean, I like when I talk to Al Cooper, I don't think he can play anymore due to back issues and stuff like that. So it's such a precious time, and it's so sad that there's not some way to work this out. I'm sure you would play in like a spacesuit bubble if they would let you into a club.
Absolutely, I certainly would. Yeah, see, Eric Clapton, he has neuropathy and nerve issues, and he's getting to the point where he can't play. Fortunately, everything is functioning right, and actually I'm playing better now than ever because I get to sit all day long and practice and play. Because if I can't play for an audience, then I play for the Byrds or for my wife. And, so we.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's frustrating because you just love that the feedback, the love that you get from being on stage. It's just it's an uplifting. It's hard to describe to someone who hasn't experienced that, but to have thousands of people there, attentive people that know the words to your songs and sing them along with you, and at that moment in time, everything is right with the world.
Yeah.
And that's hard to give up. That's why a lot of people just don't know when to walk away. And so,
I agree.
She'll tell me when it's time. She'll say, "Baby, it's time to go."
By the way, I wanted to wish you a happy birthday. I understand your birthday's coming up in a few days.
Yeah, it'll be on the 21st. So Yeah, I stopped counting years quite a long time ago, so I have no idea which one it is, but it's, I'm moving on.
My birthday's on the 25th, so we're a couple of Pisces.
A couple of Pisces. Cool. Cool.
We've been talking now for 2 hours, and it's been just a joy to talk to you, man. I appreciate it.
Oh, I appreciate it. Thank you.
My guest today has been Johnny Echols, the original guitarist for the band Love and a tireless rock and roll instigator who still gets up on LA stages, or will soon be getting up on local stages again, to jam with classic rock and garage bands. And Johnny was also principal narrator for Laurel Canyon, which I think is a definitive LA rock documentary. It can be seen now on the Epix channel. And he will also be guest starring in a new series coming out. Look for it soon, called Where the Action Was. And I just want to thank you, Johnny, for a lifetime of great contribution and for being on the show today.
Thank you. It's my pleasure.
All right. You take care, and you have a good 2021.
Thank you, man. You too. Take care, brother.